My new boss turned out to be my worst high school enemy. Then I discovered his secret. I never thought I'd be 30 years old and starting over again. But life has a way of kicking you in the teeth when you least expect it. Last spring, I lost my job at a mid-sized marketing firm. It wasn't even because I was bad at what I did. I was good, actually. My numbers were solid, clients like me. But the company got bought out. Half the department got restructured. And I was suddenly sitting in my car with a cardboard box of desk junk and no idea how I was going to pay rent. I spent the next 6 weeks in a haze of job applications, interviews that went nowhere, and eating too many instant noodles. Anyone who's been unemployed knows the drill. You start to lose track of days. Your self-worth takes a dive, and you begin questioning every decision that brought you here. So, when I got the email offering me a position at a fast-growing logistics company, I almost cried. It wasn't glamorous, but the pay was solid and the benefits were better than anything I'd had before. More importantly, it felt like a lifeline. I showed up on my first day in a freshly ironed shirt and a nervous smile, trying to project confidence I didn't feel. The building was sleek, glassy, the kind of place where you almost hear money humming in the walls. A receptionist gave me a temporary badge and pointed me toward the conference room where orientation was being held. That's when it happened. He walked in, and for a second, my brain refused to process what my eyes were telling me. Tall, a little heavier than I remembered, with streaks of gray in his once black hair, but there was no mistaking him. Mr. Harris, my high school history teacher, the man who had made my teenage years a living hell. I felt my stomach drop. My mouth went dry. Every instinct screamed at me to get up and walk out, but my legs were frozen. He hadn't seen me yet. He was busy shaking hands with another manager, laughing that same grating laugh I remembered from back in school. The laugh he used when he humiliated kids in front of the class. Memories I thought I'd buried came rushing back. The sarcastic comments about my weight, the way he'd mock me when I stumbled over an answer, how he once read one of my essays aloud, just to rip it apart line by line while everyone laughed. And now he was here. Not just here, he was wearing a badge that marked him as upper management. My boss? I wanted to convince myself it was just coincidence. That maybe I'd misremembered. That maybe he wouldn't even recognize me. It had been over a decade. People change, right? Teachers forget students all the time. But then his eyes landed on me. For a moment, his expression didn't change. Then recognition flickered across his face, followed by something else, something I couldn't quite place. Not surprise, not embarrassment, more like amusement. Well, he said, striding over with a grin that made my skin crawl. If it isn't Daniel Parker, I'll be damned. Didn't expect to see you here. My throat tightened. Yeah, I managed. Small world. He chuckled, clapping me on the shoulder with a little too much force. Welcome aboard. Looks like I'll be your direct supervisor. I forced a smile, but inside, my chest was pounding. This was the man who used to call me Daydream Danny in front of everyone. The man who once told me I'd never survive in the real world if I didn't toughen up. And now my career, my income, my future, they were all in his hands. For the rest of orientation, I could barely focus. His voice carried across the room, sharp and commanding. And it was like being 17 again, trapped in a classroom with nowhere to run. The irony wasn't lost on me. After all these years, after all the work I'd done to escape my past, I was right back where I started under his thumb. And the worst part, he seemed to enjoy it. The first week passed like a blur. New software to learn, new coworkers to meet, endless HR paperwork. On the surface, it all seemed normal. But under it, I could feel the tension simmering, like a storm waiting just beyond the horizon. Mr. Harris, no, Paul Harris now, as his nameplate proudly displayed, slid into his role as my supervisor with unsettling ease. He never outright insulted me, not like in school, but there was a familiarity in his tone that made me uneasy. Daniel, he said on my second day, lingering by my cubicle, I see you're still a slow starter. Some things never change, huh? It was said with a chuckle, a half smile, as though it was just harmless banter. But I knew better. It was the same way he'd mocked me in high school under the guise of a joke. So if I pushed back, I'd look like the one overreacting. My coworker, Jenna, glanced over her monitor at me, eyebrows raised. I forced a laugh, pretending it didn't sting. But that night, lying awake in my too small apartment, I replayed the moment over and over. The smug grin, the casual cruelty, and the old feelings came crawling back. The humiliation, the helplessness, the urge to disappear. I thought I'd left all that behind. The worst part was the flashbacks. Every little comment from him sent me spiraling back into high school. I remembered the day he told me in front of 30 classmates that I looked more like a janitor than a scholar, when I forgot to tuck in my shirt. The time he put one of my essays on the projector and dissected it like a frog, each sarcastic remark landing like a knife. And now, in staff meetings, he'd do the same thing, interrupting me mid-sentence, twisting my words, leaving everyone else to laugh politely while I shrank in my chair. "Careful, Daniel," he'd say when I made a suggestion. "You don't want to overthink things again. Remember how that worked out in history class?" Everyone else would chuckle, thinking it was just off his banner. Only I knew the weight behind those words. By the second week, I started dreading going into work. I'd sit in my car in the parking lot, gripping the steering wheel, trying to breathe, telling myself it wasn't high school. I wasn't a kid anymore, he couldn't control me. But every time I walked through those glass doors, I felt 17 again. One afternoon, after a long meeting where Harris had undermined me 3 separate times, Jenna caught me by the coffee machine. "Hey," she said, lowering her voice. "What's the deal with you and Paul? He's usually not that sharp." I hesitated. Should I tell her the truth? That this man had spent years chipping away at my self-worth? That every word from his mouth was designed to remind me I'd never be good enough? Instead, I just smiled weakly. "We go way back. Old history." She tilted her head. "Well, whatever it is, he's definitely pushing your buttons." That night, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Pushing my buttons. That's exactly what it was. He knew me too well. He remembered my weaknesses from school and was using them again. Like no time had passed at all. But why? What kind of grown man gets off on tormenting a former student? The answer came a few days later. I stayed late to finish a project, and as I walked past Harris's office, I heard him on the phone. His door was slightly ajar. "Yeah, he's here. Daniel Parker. You remember him, right? Still the same soft kid. I'll keep him in line." My blood ran cold. He was talking about me. I froze in the hallway, heart hammering. Who was he talking to? And why? The conversation ended before I could hear more. He shut the door, and I scrambled away before he noticed me. I couldn't shake the feeling all night. Whoever was on the other end of that call, someone from my past. Another teacher. Or worse, someone connected to my job now. It hit me then. This wasn't just coincidence. Harris wasn't just some random boss who happened to remember me. He had a reason for keeping me under his thumb, and I was going to find out what it was. From that night on, I couldn't look at Harris the same way. Every smirk, every cutting remark, every joke carried a darker edge. It wasn't just bullying anymore, it felt calculated. Like he had a plan, and I was part of it. I started paying closer attention. At meetings, I noticed how he'd single me out. If someone else made a mistake, it was brushed off. If I so much as mispronounced a word, he'd seize on it. "Classic Daniel," he'd say with a chuckle, always tripping over the details. The others laughed politely, but I saw the way a few of them glanced at me afterward. A seed of doubt had been planted. He was shaping how they saw me, just like he'd done with my classmates all those years ago. One Thursday, I stayed late again, determined to catch up on a report. The office was nearly empty. As I passed Harris's office, I noticed his door was ajar again. This time, his voice was lower, almost conspiratorial. "Doesn't even realize what's going on," he whispered. Pathetic, really. Some people never grow up. My stomach clenched. He was talking about me, I was sure of it. I pulled out my phone, recording app open. But before I could catch more, he closed the door, and the sound cut off. That night, I made a decision. I wasn't going to let him destroy me again. I was an adult now, not a terrified teenager. If he had skeletons in his closet, and I was starting to believe he did, I was going to find them. The chance came sooner than I expected. The following week, I was in the break room when I overheard Jenna and another coworker talking. "Did you hear about Paul's last job?" Jenna asked. "I heard he left suddenly. Something about inappropriate conduct." My ears perked up. The other coworker shrugged. "I don't know the details. He never talks about it. Just showed up here one day with glowing references like nothing happened." My pulse quickened. Inappropriate conduct. It was vague, but it was a thread and I was determined to pull it. That evening, I went digging online. It took hours of scrolling through old LinkedIn profiles, archived news snippets, and local forums. But finally, I found something. A blurry headline from a small-town newspaper, dated for years ago. "Local teacher resigns amid allegations." The article was short, just a few paragraphs. No charges filed. No names mentioned officially, but the description matched him perfectly. A male history teacher at Westbrook High. Sudden resignation, internal investigation. I leaned back in my chair, heart racing. It wasn't proof. Not yet. But it was something. The next day, I walked into the office with a new kind of determination. I wasn't going to be his victim again. But Harris must have sensed the shift, because he doubled down. During a meeting, when I presented a detailed logistics proposal, he cut me off halfway through. Ambitious, Daniel, he said, voice dripping with condescension. But maybe a little too ambitious. Remember how overcomplicating things got you in trouble back in school? A few chuckles rippled around the table. I felt heat rise in my face. But this time, instead of shrinking, I looked him dead in the eye. With respect, I said evenly, that was 15 years ago. And last I checked, this isn't a high school classroom. The room went quiet. Someone coughed. Harris's smile faltered just for a second, but then he plastered it back on. Touché, he said lightly, though I could see the flicker of irritation in his eyes. It was a small victory, but it felt huge. Still, I knew it wasn't enough. If I wanted to free myself from his grip, I need more than just confidence. I need evidence. And the more I thought about that phone call, the more I became convinced he was hiding something. Something that could not only level the playing field but tilt it in my favor. So, when I saw him leave his office one evening, without locking his computer, I made a choice. Hands shaking, I slipped inside and glanced at the screen. An open email thread stared back at me. The subject line made my stomach flip. Past incidents, confidential. I knew I shouldn't look. I knew if I got caught, my career here was over before it even began. But I also knew this was my chance. I clicked. The email thread opened in front of me, black letters glowing against the dim office light. My pulse thudded in my ears as I scanned the lines. From legal at westbrookhs.edu. Subject, past incidents, confidential. The words blurred for a second as my brain struggled to keep up. Westbrook High, the same school mentioned in the article I'd found online. The email was short, professional, but the implication made my skin crawl. Mr. Harris, as stated in our previous correspondence, the board maintains that your resignation was accepted. In lieu of further disciplinary action, the matter remains closed so long as confidentiality is maintained. We expect you to uphold your end of the agreement. My hands went cold. It wasn't just a rumor. He had been involved in something serious. Serious enough that the school district wanted it buried. Another reply from Harris himself was attached below. As agreed, I have upheld my silence. I trust that your office will continue to do the same. I've moved on to a new career path, and it's in everyone's best interest that the past stay in the past. The past? I leaned back, my heart hammering. Whatever he'd done, it was bad enough that they struck some kind of deal. Bad enough that he had to leave teaching altogether. And now here he was, lording over me like nothing had happened. For a few minutes, I just sat there, my thoughts spinning. I could screenshot the emails, send them to HR, maybe even the press. But the words were carefully chosen, vague, sanitized. No details. Nothing that would hold up as hard evidence. Still, it was a start. I took photos with my phone, every nerve in my body on edge, waiting for him to come back. When I finally slipped out of his office, my palms were slick with sweat. The next morning, I expected him to be his usual smug self. But when he walked into the office, he looked different, more tense. His jaw set tighter than usual. Had he realized I'd been in his emails? I tried to keep calm, but paranoia gnawed at me all day. Every time he glanced my way, I felt like he could see right through me. By afternoon, he called me into his office. Daniel, he said, motioning for me to sit. His voice was smooth to smooth. We need to talk. I sat stiffly, bracing myself. You've been unsettled lately, distracted. I don't know if this job is the right fit for you. The way he said it, like he was already preparing to fire me, made my stomach twist. But then he leaned forward, eyes narrowing just slightly. And I get the sense you've been snooping. That's not wise. I shot through my veins. He knew. I forced a neutral expression. I don't know what you mean. He smiled thinly. Don't play dumb. You think you're clever, but you're still the same kid I remember. Knows where it doesn't belong. Always trying to prove something. The room felt smaller, the air heavier. He leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. Let me give you some advice, he said. The past is a dangerous place to dig. People who dig too much end up burying themselves. It wasn't a threat, not directly, but I felt the weight of it all the same. I walked out of his office with my legs trembling. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying his words. He wasn't just mocking me anymore, he was warning me. And that meant I was onto something real. Something he couldn't afford to let surface. The thought terrified me, but it also fueled me. I wasn't 17 anymore. I wasn't powerless. The next week, I built my case. I gathered everything I could, screenshots of the emails, the old newspaper article, notes of every inappropriate comment he'd made to me in the office. I even started quietly asking coworkers if they noticed anything off about him. Some shrugged it off, but a few admitted they thought he was a little too personal with his comments, especially toward younger employees. Piece by piece, a picture was forming. Still, I hesitated. Blowing the whistle could destroy him, but it could also backfire. If HR sided with him, I'd be branded as a troublemaker. My career would be over before it even began. But then he'd push me too far. It was a Friday afternoon. We were in a team meeting, and I presented a proposal I'd worked on for 2 weeks. Halfway through, Harris cut me off with a loud laugh. Daniel, he said, shaking his head. You always did think bigger than your brain could handle. Remember your senior project? What a disaster that was. A few people chuckled, but others looked uncomfortable. Jenna shot me a sympathetic glance. That was it. I felt something inside me snap. Funny you bring up the past, I said, my voice sharper than I intended. Because some of us actually learn from it. Others just run from it. The room went silent. Harris's face froze for a fraction of a second before he forced another laugh. But I'd seen the flicker of panic in his eyes. I pressed on. Maybe we should all take a closer look at who's leading this team. What skeletons are hiding in their closet? Daniel, he said warningly, his voice tight. That's enough. But I didn't stop. Not this time. I pulled out my phone, opening one of the screenshots, and slid it across the table toward Jenna. Go ahead. Read it. Her eyes widened as she scanned the email. She passed it to the person next to her, whispers spreading like wildfire around the room. Harris's face went pale. He snatched the phone off the table, his mask cracking. This is private, he snapped. This is slander. You have no idea what you're dealing with. I leaned back, meeting his glare with steady eyes. You're right. I don't know everything, but I know enough. And I'm not 17 anymore. Paul, you don't get to bully me into silence. The meeting ended in chaos. Harris stormed out, furious, while my coworkers buzzed with questions. By Monday, HR had called me in. They wanted everything, every screenshot, every note, every detail. I gave it all to them. I don't know what will happen next. Maybe they'll sweep it under the rug. Maybe he'll wriggle out of it just like he did before. But maybe, just maybe, this time he won't. And even if he does, something has changed. I looked him in the eye. I stood my ground. I proved to myself that I'm not that kid anymore. For the first time in years, I feel free.